Hello everyone. This video is going to cover demand, and we're going to pick right up with the quantity demanded. So the quantity demanded is going to be the amount of goods that buyers are willing and able to produce at the current price. And the law of demand is that all else equal, there's an inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded. So keep in mind that quantity demanded, or QD, is going to be an amount, so it's going to be a number. Every price has a quantity demanded associated with it. And that inverse relationship just means that if price goes up, then the quantity demanded will decrease. And that if price goes down, typically the quantity demanded will increase. Now, keep in mind that in all of these examples that we're talking about, every other aspect or every other kind of area of this, we're holding constant. So assume all else held constant when we're talking about these examples. So a demand schedule is just going to be a table that shows the relationship between the price and quantity demanded. And then the demand curve is going to be the graph that shows that relationship between the price and the quantity demanded. These are the two ways that we're going to represent our demand. First up, we want to take a look at a demand schedule. So this entire table is showing the rock's demand schedule for healing crystals. And you can see that we have the prices of healing crystals on the left and the number that's demanded of these crystals on the right. Now, as that price goes up, less people want to purchase these. So there's less people that are demanding them. And as that price goes down, that quantity demanded is increasing. So this is going to be a demand schedule. It's just going to be kind of a table illustration of that demand. Now here we have a demand curve. This is when we graphically are going to demonstrate what's going on with demand. And you can see that the demand curve is going to be the graph of the relationship between prices on the demand schedule and the quantity demanded of those prices. Meaning we're taking what we saw on that table and we're putting it into graph form. When we talk about the curve, that's just going to be the line that's on this graph. And we can see that inverse relationship, a little bit better because it does produce a downward sloping curve, meaning that as we have our high price, the rock doesn't want to buy any of these crystals. But as that price goes down, he's going to want to buy more and more of them. So you can see here, increase in price is going to be a decrease in demand. And keep in mind that with this curve, we're assuming that the only two things that are changing here are going to be the price and that quantity demanded. So with market demand, this is instead of looking at one particular individual like the rock, we're looking at everyone in that particular market and how their demand is affected. This is a horizontal sum of all individual quantities demanded by each buyer in the market at each particular price. This sounds really complicated, but I promise you it's not too bad. All that we're doing is looking at, in this case, two people to simplify it. We're saying the Rock and Emma, and we're going to add up what their demand is at each particular price level, and we're going to use those to come up with a market demand in total. If the price is $20, the Rock doesn't want any and Emma doesn't want any as well. So market demand is 0. If the price is $17.50, the Rock wants 1, Emma still wants none. So market demand is only 1. And then we're looking to set any price point. So at $7.50, the Rock would prefer 5, Emma wants 2. So market demand is 7. Again, we're just taking each particular individual and we're adding up those 2 individuals or 3 individuals or 1 million individuals' preferences to get that market demand number. Another important thing to consider is changes in quantity demanded versus changes in demand. So let's kind of take a look at everything provided on this slide. When we're talking about changes in quantity demanded, this is a movement along that line or along that demand curve. This is by changes only in price, and you can look at different points along that same curve. When we talk about a change in demand, that entire curve is going to shift either to the left or to the right, and this is going to be changes in anything other than price. So different demand curves will move to the left or the right. Very important to consider, and we'll kind of look at that graphically in a few examples. But changes in quantity demanded are just related to change in price. And that's going to be movement along that line like we've seen so far. Whereas change in demand means that entire line is going to jump either to the right or to the left. So definitely want to write that down. Here is a practice what you know for us to work on together. So in this particular case, the price of Oreos is falling. We want to know what's going to happen to this graph. Are we going to have a movement along that curve that's going to be a change in that quantity demanded? Or are we going to have a change in demand where that entire curve is going to jump either to the right or to the left? Think about that for a second. And again, what's happening here is that the price of Oreos is falling. So a change in price. With that change in price, we're just going to have movement along the curve. So this is a change in quantity demanded because just the price changed. And you can see here that if the price goes from $3 down to $2, that demand is going to increase. So people are going to demand 5 Oreos rather than 4. So it's a change in the quantity demanded, and it's just movement along that curve. Now, in this particular example, the price of movie tickets is going to be increasing. So the price is changing. We want to know, are we going to see movement along the curve, or are we going to see the whole entire curve itself jump to the right or the left? And the correct answer here is that if that price goes up, we're just going to see movement along the curve. So we're still saying on this curve, the curve itself is not moving. And what's happening is that as that price increases, that quantity demanded is going to decrease. So less people are going to either be willing or able to afford those movie tickets. So the quantity demanded is going to fall from 3 to 2. So those are all when we have a change in the quantity demanded, but we haven't had a chance yet to look at changes in demand itself. So here we have our original line. We're going to call that D1, and we're looking at price and quantity demanded of cantaloupes. So with that first click, if there's anything that changes with that price, we're just going to have movement along this curve. And just like with our other demand curves, it is downward sloping because of that law of demand. There's an inverse relationship that as that price increases, the quantity demanded will decrease. So at a price of $5, 6 cantaloupes are demanded. And we could pick any price and find that quantity demanded along this demand curve. If the price changed to $4, we would see movement along this curve. And as that price went down, that quantity demanded would go up. Now, let's say that overall we had a decrease in demand in total. Maybe there's a health warning that comes out that causes buyers to want fewer cantaloupes. And we're saying, what would happen? Well, what would happen is that people would want fewer cantaloupes at any prices. So there would be a shift in overall demand because of a change in something other than price. In this case, a health warning told buyers that they shouldn't really eat cantaloupe, it's bad for you. So even if the price is still $5, that quantity demanded is going to now drop to 3. So this is when we say a shift in the entire curve. We jumped from our original D1 all the way over to D2. And that price hasn't changed, but that quantity demanded sure has changed. Now, let's look at an increase in demand. Say that rather than it being something negative, a new medical study concludes that eating cantaloupes actually lowers your cholesterol and it's really healthy for you. In this case, more people are going to want cantaloupes regardless of that price. So you can see here, that curve jumps to the right. There's an increase in demand. And now at $5, there's actually 9 people that are willing to pay for these. So when we have an entire shift to the left of the demand curve, that means that there's been a decrease in demand. And when we have an entire shift where that whole curve jumps to the right, that means that we've had an increase in demand and more people are going to want to buy cantaloupes at any price. So some factors that are going to shift demand that are not price related at all. These could be things like changes in income. Most goods are going to be normal goods, but there are going to be other goods that are considered inferior goods. So a normal good, if my change in income happens and I make more money, I'm going to want to buy more of that good. Inferior goods, I'm going to want to buy less of when I get more money. Just to give you kind of an example, when you look at shopping, so they give you Urban Outfitters as an example here. This is just a normal good. As I'm making more money, I'm probably going to go out and shop more and maybe spend more money at places like Urban Outfitters. But inferior goods are things that as I start to make more money, I'm not really interested in those goods anymore. So shrimp ramen is the example they give here. Everyone pretty much knows that ramen is very cheap. It's a good meal if you don't have a lot of cash. So if I were to make more money, maybe I look at ramen as an inferior good and I say, well, I'm going to go out for more steak dinners now. And I'm going to buy less ramen because my income has risen and I want more of those normal goods and less of those inferior things. Now, something important to keep in mind, maybe shrimp ramen is your favorite food in the whole world. Just because something is considered normal or inferior to one person, that's not necessarily the case for somebody else. And it's really going to depend on that person's taste or preference. Something kind of important, I will always indicate if a good in question is inferior. Otherwise, you should just assume it's a normal good. Now, something that's also useful to kind of talk about is wealth. Wealth is going to be a stock variable whenever income flow is variable, meaning that we're not really looking at wealth as a whole. We're just looking at income as something that fluctuates. And that demand on large ticket items like cars, boats, and so on, this really might depend on wealth just as much as it does on income, but we're going to really be focusing on income or just our current wage at this particular moment. Now, just to give you a little bit of extra help on normal versus inferior goods, when you think of normal goods, think of things like steak, housing, laptops, TVs, going out to eat at restaurants, and name brand clothing. Versus inferior goods would be things like canned meat, so Spam. It could be things like ramen, mac and cheese, store-bought or store brand or generic goods, things like secondhand clothing or furniture. Those are all going to be considered kind of those inferior goods. Now, another thing that shifts demand is going to be the price of related goods. So these are those changes in anything other than price that's going to affect that demand curve or make it jump. And this is where we start to look at complements and substitutes. So complements are two goods that are typically used together, whereas substitutes are goods that can be used in place of each other. We always want to work through to think of what's going to happen with demand. So let's say that as an individual, you always consume Red Vines and Mr. Pibb. So these are things that you always like together. You would never go out and buy a Mr. Pibb unless you were going to go out and get Red Vines as well. Now, if that price of Red Vines goes up, that particular candy, the quantity of Red Vines demanded will fall. We know that that's price related. It's just a shift along that curve. But as an individual, if you consider Red Vines and Mr. Pibb to be complements, if you're going to consume fewer Red Vines because of that increase in price, you'll also consume less Mr. Pibb just because those goods are complements and that demand overall for Mr. Pibb will fall. Now, trying to memorize these effects is confusing, but kind of trying to think of it as a story is always going to get you to the right answer. When we talk about substitutes, let's think about Domino's and Pizza Hut. So if Domino's pizza price falls, more people are going to want to buy Domino's pizza. So their demand is going to rise because of that shift along the curve. Now, if people are consuming more Domino's, it's likely that they're going to buy less pizza at Pizza Hut. So Pizza Hut's demand curve will completely jump to the left because that demand overall has decreased as a result of the price decrease in their substitute. There's a lot of other things you can think of as complements. So biscuits and gravy, milk and cereal, printers and toner, Peanut butter and jelly, tennis rackets, and tennis balls. These are all examples of complements. Substitutes would be things like Coke and Pepsi, Snickers and Milky Way, butter and margarine, Pizza Hut and Domino's, and the list goes on and on. Looking at the price of related goods, so we're looking at peanut butter and jelly here. We're saying that if the price of peanut butter increases, we would just have movement along that peanut butter curve. So price is what's changing. We're simply moving from A to B. And you can see that as that price goes up, less people are going to want peanut butter. Now, if peanut butter and jelly are complements, the jelly curve is going to actually jump or shift overall to the left, because if less people are consuming peanut butter, they're going to also consume less jelly. Another thing that can shift our demand curve overall are just changes in tastes and preferences. So goods might become either more or less fashionable. They may come into style or go out of style. And things can also come in and out of season. As we transition from summer into fall and winter, more and more people might be wanting to buy warmer clothes, and those summer clothes are going to have less of a demand. Other things outside of price that can shift that demand curve are going to be things like price expectations. So our consumption today might depend on what we think is going to happen tomorrow. If I think that the price might go up, I might stock up now while that price is lower. Or if I think that price is going to go down, I might not buy any today. If more people come into the market, then that market demand might increase because there's more buyers that are interested in that good. And then taxes and subsidies are going to affect that as well. So we're going to talk more about taxes later, but excise taxes are going to raise the cost to consumers, and subsidies are going to encourage consumers to be able to afford more goods. So these are all things that are going to change that, demand curve overall that aren't necessarily price related. So here's a practice what we know question. In this case, the price of a Burger King Whopper falls. What do we think is going to happen to the demand of Big Macs at McDonald's? So if Burger King Whoppers get cheaper, we're looking at the graph for McDonald's Big Macs. We know that if the Burger King Whopper price falls, that Burger King will just have a shift along that curve because that price is changing. But for McDonald's, they may have an entire jump of that curve over to the left, which means just overall a decrease in demand because more people are interested in consuming that Burger King Whopper. Now, in this case, we're looking at the price and quantity of steak dinners. And the event here is that you get a pay raise at your job. So if you get a pay raise, that doesn't really affect the price of steak dinners. The price of steak dinners is the same, but your personal demand curve for steak dinners might jump over to the right because now you're willing to pay more, regardless of what the price is, because you are making more money yourself. In this case, we're looking at the price and the quantity demanded of generic cheese. If you get a pay raise at your job, so the price is not changing of generic or store brand cheese, but what might happen for you is that you might shift your entire demand curve over and demand less of that generic cheese regardless of the price, because now you're moving on up and you're buying Kraft Singles or some other specific brand. Now, another practice what you know, in this case, we're looking at the price and demand for pizza. And the event that's happening here is that the price of your favorite beverage is falling. Now, in this case, we're considering that your favorite beverage and pizza are complements. If the price of your favorite beverage goes down, you're going to consume more of your favorite beverage, which in turn is going to make you consume more pizzas. So that demand curve for pizzas is going to jump or shift over to the right. And finally, here we're looking at a demand curve for oranges. So we have price on our y-axis, oranges demand on the x. And the event that's happening here is, let's say that doctors discover that oranges cure baldness. Well, what's going to happen is our entire curve is going to jump over to the right because everybody is going to want more oranges regardless of the price. So we're going to see a shift from D1 to D2 rather than just movement along that curve. That is where we're going to go ahead and stop for this particular video. If you're interested in more practice what you know questions, you can head over to Blackboard and take a look at them in that slideshow. Otherwise, you can go ahead and move on, and I'll talk with you in the next one. Thank you.